Welcome to A Fine Time, The Nanny Revisited. This is a podcast about The Nanny, where we recap each episode and then discuss, sharing our own unique take on each episode. I'm Bernadette.
And I'm Debbie.
Before we get into the summary of today's episode, I wanted to confess something. This is actually our second attempt at recording this. Unfortunately, I had internet problems the other day that messed up our first recording, so we're trying again. If we sound a little different, it's because we're trying something new, so please bear with us.
Today, we're talking about episode 5, Here Comes the Brood. As usual, we're going to start with a brief summary of the episode. Before I dive in, I must say that I love this episode, and I will do my best to control my enthusiasm, but I will probably fail. So needless to say, I really don't mind talking about it again.
Yeah.
So I'll now briefly summarize Here Comes the Brood. Cece arrives at the Sheffield house in time to watch Fran send the kids off to school. Jealous of Fran's familial interactions with Maxwell, Cece agrees to go to the zoo on Saturday with the family on Fran's day off. Come Saturday morning, Gracie's nightmare begins coming true when Fran forbids Maxwell from going to the zoo because of a toothache, leaving Cece to mind the children alone. The zoo trip was not a resounding success, and Cece spills the beans that Fran gets paid to take care of the Sheffield children. Upset, Gracie takes a limo and runs away to Fran's parents' apartment in Flushing. Sylvia fawns over Gracie as possibly her only grandchild, while Fran calls the Sheffield home. Thinking the zoo outing was a success, Maxwell compliments Cece just as Cece reports that she's almost positive that Gracie came home with them. Cece and Maxwell go to Fran's cousin's wedding to collect Gracie, who learns that Fran does get paid to spend time with her. In a heartwarming exchange, Fran explains to Gracie that while she does get paid to take care of her, she doesn't get paid extra for loving her. Gracie and Maxwell share an adorable father-daughter dance, and Fran puts Cece in her place for picking on 6-year-old Gracie. Did I miss anything, Bernadette?
Nope, I think you did a pretty good job. And I know you and I kind of briefly discussed this prior to starting, but I believe today we're going to try to go scene by scene, just kind of discussing things we notice, things we want to talk about that don't really fall into the categories, of our different shticks, just so that, our listeners know what we're going to be doing here today.
Thanks, Bernadette. I think that's a great clarification, and hopefully our listeners will agree that this is a good way for us to structure our discussion. That said, there are some things that we will talk about that go from scene to scene, like where there is a continuing theme, but we will do our best to talk about the episode scene by scene going forward.
Yep. And we open to a very domestic scene. And
Yes.
Again, another one of Fran's robes that she must have a very large collection.
Yes.
Because this one is, again, kind of more of a breakfast theme, I think, in terms of like there's a pan. Is it eggs? What's in there? I can't remember.
Yeah, there were eggs, and I think there was a cup of coffee. It is a breakfast themed robe. So yeah, but and she's also carrying a cup of coffee with her. As you said, this scene is just incredibly domestic. As Fran's getting the kids off to school, she quizzes Brighton on his multiplication table in advance of his math test. She fixes Maggie's hair and relieves her headache, and reassures Gracie about the melting of the polar ice caps. I think that's just such a great thing. Fran says something that Gracie have fun or have a nice day or whatever. And Gracie says, how can I when the ice caps are melting? And Fran says, don't worry about it. I put a snorkel in your lunchbox.
Yeah. So she very much knows, the interactions, with them. She's also yelling like up the stairs.
Yes. To get them to come.
Yes. Very much as a mother would.
Yes. She tells them that the limo is waiting, and Brighton has a snarky comment: is it the town car or the stretch, or something like that? Which not to spoil things coming forward, but in a future episode there is a debate, an argument between the kids over who has to take the town car and who has to take the stretch limo.
Those. I've never had that problem, Debbie.
I haven't either, but and it's funny that is your reaction, because in the episode I'm thinking of, that is, the comment is, well, we have problems just like every other family. And it's like,
Oh yeah.
not quite, not
Yeah.
quite. But back
Mhm.
to Gracie and the polar ice caps, it just strikes me every time that I watch this episode that this episode is over 20 years old and we're still worrying about the polar ice caps.
Oh yes. Yep. So poor Gracie.
Exactly. Can you imagine how anxious and stressed out of an adult she'd be now? Um,
Oh, yeah. Yeah, she would be very stressful, I'm
she,
sure.
she would be a stereotypical millennial, wouldn't she?
Yeah. Well, another kind of bit of domesticity is that, Fran is trying to wipe the schmutz. Did I get that right? Off
Schmutz, yes.
Maxwell's face. Um, and I have in my notes, and I'm trying to recall now. Didn't Fran say something about daddy?
Yes, I was
Like,
actually about to go there. Um,
hmm
so, as we said in the summary, Fran's trying to get the kids off to school, and Cece arrives in her olive green overcoat, which we will see more of. Um, and Fran says to the kids after Cece's gotten there, "Say goodbye to Daddy." And Cece
hmm
says, "Did Daddy? Did I miss the wedding?" And she has this little twitch, and Niall says that twitch becomes you, or something like that. Um, yeah, but so part of that is, I think, what builds into Cece's jealousy, for lack of better word, right? She's seeing how Fran has enmeshed herself in the Sheffield family life, and like they do seem like one big happy family. Um, and she obviously takes some digs at Fran, and then I really love the exchange between Cece and Maxwell, where Cece says something along the lines of, "I feel like I haven't spent any time with you and the children," and Maxwell looks at her and says, "You never spent any time with me and the children," and she's like, "Well, why dwell in the past?" Which is, of course, how she ends up getting roped into going to the zoo. Which, by the way, her reaction of Maxwell's suggestion, "Go to why don't, we can go to the zoo on Saturday." She's like, "The zoo?" Like totally incredulous. "Oh,
Yeah.
how wonderful, how marvelous!" I think is what she
hmm
says. Um, I also really like the quip from Niles after Maxwell compliments Cece, saying, "This is a side of you that's rather unexpected," and he's like clearly impressed and happy that she wants to spend time with him and his kids. Um, and she says something along the lines of, "Well, Maxwell, I adore children. It's a natural thing, a female thing." And
hmm
Niall says, "I hear some females eat their young," which of
hmm
course, obviously makes me think of hamsters and other small rodents, because they will eat their young if you touch them.
hmm Yeah. And full disclosure, I did not really know that. But in our first recording, Debbie did educate me on that.
For our listeners who do not have the benefit of our prior conversation, I will quickly summarize what I'm getting at. Hamsters and mice, and I assume gerbils and other small rodents, when they are born pink and hairless. They are blind and deaf. They're totally dependent on their mother. If you touch the babies before their eyes open and they're furry and their ears are open and they're walking around, their mommies will eat them. The way that I've always understood that is that they no longer smell like the mom. And so she thinks there's something fundamentally wrong with them. And then she eats them to put them out of their misery. So that is what Niles is getting at, sort of.
hmm
At least that's what it always makes me think of.
hmm Yeah. And I did note uh, before, kind of the thing that was a little off-putting with this particular scene is that as the kids are getting ready to go to school, we see the children in their school uniforms. And Fran's telling the girls, especially, like how pretty they look. And Maggie, I believe, is the one who's like, "Well, we always wear these uniforms." And Fran says, "Well, trust me, men dream about these outfits," which I was like, "Oh, ugh,
Yeah.
not super great."
I mean, I took note of that exchange as well. Um,
hmm
I think it's just a stereotype that Fran was trying to make a joke about. I don't
hmm
find their uniforms particularly nice looking, so whatever.
hmm
That didn't bother me. Um, a-
hmm
as you know, as I said at the beginning, this is my
Mhm.
this is one of my favorite episodes, and I think it's my favorite episode in season 5. In season 1. Wow, it's episode 5. Haha. Wow, you guys. Sorry about
It's
that.
okay.
So
You're just so excited, Debbie.
I am really excited. There is basically nothing in this episode I dislike. So there's a little
Interesting.
asterisk after that statement because there is something that, based on what I'm reading at present, caught me. But I just
Mhm.
love this. I love so much about this episode. That is why
Mhm.
we're going to keep talking about it. So
Yeah. And I think too, part of it is, we had that conversation in our in the previous episode about like the different ages with relationships, the whole kind of dynamic with that,
right.
um, and stuff. And I think that may play into it as well in terms of things sticking out to me. And again, like I feel in general when you're or you're watching something, knowing you're going to be talking about it, you may be looking a bit more closer nitpicking. But again, in this first scene, that's kind of what um, kind of was the kind of stumbling block a little bit for me. Um, was there anything else in the scene that you wanted to discuss, or are you ready for the next one?
I think I'm ready for the next scene. Why don't you
Okay.
remind our listeners what the next scene is?
So we are now at breakfast at the Sheffield house, and Fran again has another bathrobe, which I think looked pretty comfy. And Maxwell said that he is coming in pain. It's the morning that the kids are supposed to be going to the zoo with Maxwell and Cece, but Maxwell says he slept on his tooth funny or wrong.
Yep.
Which how does one do that? And at the same time, before that, Gracie was talking about that she had a nightmare. It had fangs and claws and snarling. And no, she's not talking about the zoo animals. She's, as Brighton points out, is talking about Cece. So again, it looks like Maxwell's going to be down for the count. He kind of resists that, but Fran insists that he go to the dentist. And in fact, even though most dentists are not open on Saturdays, she has an uncle.
Uncle Myron.
Yes, who Maxwell can go to. But again, there there's a particular line, Debbie, and it's Niles saying that, oh, it looks like he may need to be the one masticating
Yes.
for Maxwell and in the future. And of course, Fran says, well, you deserve time and a half for that one.
Yep. It's so interesting to me how, sometimes you and I identified the exact same line as something we want to talk about. But at other times, there are lines like, I've heard that line, again, I've seen this episode so many times. And it's funny, but I wouldn't have thought to comment on it. I want to talk about how it gets determined that Maxwell cannot go to the zoo with everyone. Because I think,
go ahead.
So, one thing that you left out from the scene is that Cece arrives, to go with the children and Maxwell to the zoo, and she looks smashing, right? She's in her, I guess, park ranger, her safari uniform.
It's safari, yeah. And I quickly have to insert, I really appreciate Niles's line, Miss Babcock, I presume.
Yes.
I'm assuming you get the reference.
Should I?
Yes, it is. Have you ever heard of the line, Dr. Livingston, I presume?
No.
Does that ring a bell?
I can't say that I have.
Okay, so basically, Dr. Livingston, I presume, is a famous line from when Henry Stanley found Dr. Livingston in Africa. They were like explorers in Africa. So that I took it as a play on that particular line, because Miss Babcock is like in full safari gear.
Right. I don't want to step on our shticks too much, but there's a line in the next scene where Niles says something along the lines of, I'll find it in my notes. Look who's out of Africa.
Mm-hmm.
which I took to be a reference to the 1985 film Out of Africa starring Meryl Streep.
Mm-hmm. So a
Um,
lot of different references
yeah,
that Niall has at his disposal.
I'm beginning to think that even as much as we try to catch all of the notable New Yorkers and other notables who are referenced, I'm beginning to think maybe we don't catch them all because we just don't know. Like, I
Yeah,
didn't know
probably.
the Miss Babcock, I presume line was a play on anything. I just thought he was making fun of the way she looked because she looked
Mm-hmm.
nothing like herself. Or
Mm-hmm.
I shouldn't say that. I should say she was not at all dressed the way she normally is. She's normally
Yes.
dressed like a stereotypical late 80s, early 90s career woman, right? She has the long
Mm-hmm.
jackets and she different length skirts, but often long skirts or a pantsuit. And here she's in, as you put it, full safari gear.
Yeah. But it's from Abercrombie and Fitch.
So she paid double,
Yes.
as Fern put it. Um,
Yeah.
but
But anyway, you were saying she shows up.
right. And, she tries to, you know, copy what Fran did in the last scene. As you pointed out, Fran removed the schmutz from Maxwell's face, and so Cece does the same thing, saying, "Maxwell, you have some crumbs." She licks the tissue, and I skipped over what I actually wanted to talk about, but she licks the tissue, and she tries to get the crumbs off Maxwell's face, and he shouts in pain, which is what actually I think gets Fran to say, "No, you're not going." But sorry, I'm having trouble remembering the exact sequencing of this scene, but the part I really wanted to talk about is, Maxwell drinks from his water and he says, "Oh, why is the water so blasted cold?" And Brighton, without missing a beat, says, "It's the polar ice caps." And Gracie shrieks and runs to Fran for comfort.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that, because those two things that we just talked about, with the polar ice cap reference and Cece trying to copy Fran getting the schmutz off Maxwell's face, there's such perfect symmetry between the first
Mm-hmm.
scene and the second. Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's wonderful.
Yeah. And we'll talk about it a bit more, but I think, we both discussed in our first round, there's symmetry throughout this episode that we can kind of point out.
That is true.
I did want to quickly, while I'm remembering, just a quick note about the first scene as well. It opens with Miles working on some flower arrangements, which at the time I'm like, why are they showing this? But we'll come back to that.
Right. Excellent point. I was just thinking that.
Mm-hmm.
So then we cut to so anyway, Fran says that, she forbids Maxwell from going because, this is what happens when you neglect dental hygiene. And
Mm-hmm.
says that Maxwell says something like, "Well, the children we're supposed to go to the zoo." And she says, "Well, Cece, Miss Babcock can take them." And of course, Miss Babcock looks horrified, and Gracie says, "This is exactly how my nightmare started."
Uh-huh.
And needless to say, Gracie was sort of prophetic, because in the next scene, I hope it's okay to jump there,
Yeah.
they're coming home from the zoo, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it is clear it did not go well.
Yeah.
They're angry sounding, they're sort of fighting, and we find out that, Maggie had to stop at every bathroom because her bladder, it's not small, it's tilted. We find out
Mm-hmm.
Gracie didn't get to go to the petting zoo, and Brighton threw up in Miss Babcock's helmet.
Mm-hmm. But it's not really Brian's fault, because who listens to a 10-year-old
Exactly.
when they say they want to eat all the junk food?
When the responsible adult, his nanny, said, "Don't let him eat junk food."
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll also say that Brighton looked super, really chipper for someone who had just thrown up.
Mm-hmm. And, probably a little pleased with himself, because we also learned later, not only was it the helmet, it was also Miss Babcock's purse. So.
Correct. Which you also have to wonder how Cece didn't notice that happened.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And also, she tries to give the helmet to Niles to clean, and he hands it back to her, telling her to try baking soda. And I think, I would probably just throw the whole purse out. be done with it.
Mm-hmm.
Not worth it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so, just because we're talking about going to a zoo in New York, um, I want, I wonder kind of what you said, like, if you're watching something that you're going to talk about, you start thinking more critically about it. I sort of wonder which zoo they went to. I wonder if they went to the Bronx Zoo or the Central Park Zoo. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so just the musings of my mind.
Mm-hmm.
So in this scene, Cece is clearly at her wit's end. Um, and I don't want to step on your toes too much, but Cece is so tired of hearing the kids say anything, talk about Fran, because she's who they talk about, which makes
Mm-hmm.
sense. She spends her time taking care of them. She's their primary
Mm-hmm.
caretaker. I think you wanted to mention the line that Cece says
Yeah.
specifically.
Yeah. So it's, if I hear the F word one more time. So when we talked before, I was saying how I was amused that they did that word play with Fran being the F word. And then you had pointed out to me that actually they had used that for a promotional
Correct.
thing for the nanny.
Yeah. So when the nanny was in syndication on, I couldn't tell you which network, but that was the line. Cece's line was used in the advertisements, telling people when they could watch the nanny. So
Mm-hmm. Nice. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's very clear that again, the kids were just talking about Fran a lot, and Miss Babcock's like really jealous and at her wit's end with this whole thing. Um, and I don't know, are you ready for the next scene? Or was there anything else with this particular scene?
so I'll just to make sure our listeners are aware. So after she says that iconic line, um, Maggie makes a comment about how, well, Fran likes spending time with us or something like that. And Cece gets all bent out of shape and says, well, let me tell you something about your precious nanny. She gets paid to spend time with you. I did it for free, or I did it for nothing, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
obviously everyone's tensions are running high at this point, and Gracie's like, that's not true. Fran loves us, and runs away. And
Mm-hmm.
one thing I noticed while watching it, in preparation for our discussion, is Maggie follows her,
Mm-hmm.
which
Hmm.
sort of makes the next scene a little bit confusing, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, let's jump
Yeah.
to the next scene. Where are we in the next scene?
We are at Sylvia's apartment. So Fran's parents' apartment in Flushings. And well, not to get too into it, but Fran is wearing a very interesting outfit.
We will talk
Very
about
pink.
we will talk about the pink floral dress shortly, or not so
Mm-hmm.
shortly, depending on how long our conversation goes.
Yeah. But essentially, Fran and Sylvia are getting ready for the wedding that Fran is a bridesmaid in. And couple of things. I think Sylvia's putting polish on her run on her skirt, but it's not the clear polish. So that doesn't, work too great. Um, and, there Sylvia instructs Fran to comb her father's hair. Um, not the hair piece, not the hair on his head, but a
But
hair
she calls
piece.
it the hair. Go comb your
Uh-huh.
father's hair. But even
Yeah.
before that, in the process of getting ready, Sylvia needs help getting in her dress, right? She needs Fran to she says, zip me up. And Fran's obviously struggling to do that. And there's this great exchange where Fran says something along the lines of, I don't know about this dress, Ma. I don't know about these straps, Ma. You look like a ham. And Sylvia says something like, the sales girl said I look like a dream. And Fran pauses and says, maybe Oscar Myers.
Mm-hmm. And that's where we differ a little bit then, because you think it's a great exchange. I'm a little with that. But because as we have discussed before, there have occasionally been jokes made regarding weight and that kind of stuff. And in general, I'm not a huge fan of that type of humor.
No, that's fair. Two things I want to say. versus indirect response to that, which is, I take your point that they are sort of picking at Sylvia's size, but that the getting a dress that's too small, I think, is sort of a universal experience. And I don't think it was necessarily that they were playing on her being overweight. It was more that the sales girl should have told her it was too tight, right? And you look like a ham. I don't think that's playing on her weight. I also find the ham reference amusing because, as we've covered before, pig is not kosher, so it's sort of a strange comparison. But my understanding, and I've never had ham, so maybe I'm wrong, but doesn't it have a crisscross pattern, like the wrapping?
It depends on what type of ham you have.
Okay,
there's different types
I didn't know that.
So yeah, I mean, in terms of packaging and stuff, I mean, you have your deli meat ham slices, you have the hams that you might get for, a holiday. So I guess it just kind of depends.
See, and it was the second type of ham. Ham is not my, I do not have a real reference point here. I have a veggie ham reference point, which I think has the crisscross pattern. And I thought, anyway, my assumption was that the crisscrossing of the straps on the dress matched or was similar to the crisscross pattern on certain ham packaging. And I thought that was the joke they were making.
Well, it
makes
could
you feel any better. And then the other thing, I've been trying to figure out a good place to slip this in our conversations. I don't know where I heard this. I don't know if I heard it or read it. But anyway, my understanding is that Renee Taylor, she's the actress who plays Sylvia, in her contract, she demanded that she would not be eating in every scene she was in, or something like that. Like that was part of the agreement. So I just wanted
for her to not eat in each scene.
Correct.
Interesting.
I mean, she does eat in a lot of scenes, as we have seen and we will see, but that she's not to be eating in every scene.
So she's no Brad Pitt in Ocean's 11. Have you ever seen it?
No, that was a fake laugh.
In every scene. In every scene, his character's eating something. So
I hope he liked the food he was eating then. So, the other thing about them getting ready, which I find amusing, is, Sylvia tells Fran to go get her shoes. And now if I said to someone who I'm living with, go get my shoes, they would probably go to a shoe rack, a closet, or, the floor by the door or something. But no, Fran goes to the freezer in the kitchen.
Yeah. Not where you usually put your shoes.
No. Now, and Fran makes the comment of, if you wore leather, your feet wouldn't sweat. I don't know if that's an accurate statement. I don't buy leather for ethical reasons. I can't say that I've noticed my feet sweating. But I thought that was an interesting trick, and also kind of a painful one, because by the time you get your feet in the frozen shoes, it's going to be unpleasant.
Yeah. I don't think I would ever really try that hack.
No.
It sounds really cold, really stiff, just not what you're wanting for your feet.
Sounds uncomfortable all around. Just because, in the news, we've heard a lot about inflation. I thought it was interesting that Sylvia makes the comment about how she's not going to pay top dollar for shoes she's only going to wear once. $19.95, they're perfect, or something like that. And I guess I haven't bought shoes in a while, but that sounded like a reasonable amount of money to spend on a pair of shoes you're only going to wear a handful of times, if not. But
yeah, like that would be a steal.
Yeah, that's kind of what I thought. Okay, so as they're getting ready, the doorbell rings, and they don't know who it is. And who is it? It's Gracie, who, the first question out of Sylvia's mouth to Gracie is, do you want a scooter pie? And I love how she sort of leans forward. I'm doing that as we're talking. Do you want a scooter pie?
And I had no idea what a scooter pie was. And I even missed the word scooter. I just heard something pie. But you looked into it, right,
Yes.
Debbie?
So according to oldtimecandy.com, a scooter pie is a version of a moon pie named after New York Yankees shortstop Phil Scooter Rizzuto. They have 2 graham-like crackers sandwiching a layer of marshmallow covered with chocolate. Also, according to Old Time Candy, they have been discontinued by the manufacturer. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Thank you, oldtimecandy.com. I appreciate being able to read from your webpage as we're doing our podcast.
We are not sponsored.
We are not sponsored. No. Let us know if you'd like to. Anyway, so Gracie's there, and Fran's reaction is not to ask her if she wants a scooter pie, but to say, what happened? What's the matter? Like, why is she there? How did you get here? And she says, I took a limo.
I ran away. I took a limo.
Yes, I love that line. It happens a little later in the scene, and to that, Fran says, I ran away. I took a banana, as if she's recounting the time when she was a child and she tried to run away from home. Like,
yeah, and we had a little conversation last time about that, where I was like confused a little bit because I didn't know if it was another reference to something. So I Googled it, seeing like, is there any other media that has the line, I ran away, I took a banana? And all that really popped up for me was this episode.
I'm very glad to hear that again, because I could only imagine what else you could have found on the internet.
Yeah.
So I guess, a question that I have watching this more critically is, well, what happened to the limo and the driver? Because clearly Gracie didn't take the limo and drive herself. I'm not sure she's even tall enough to do that. So just practically speaking, what happened? So, in this scene, Fran says, you're supposed to be at the zoo with Cece. And Sylvia says, well, maybe she's allergic. Your Uncle Marvin is allergic to peacocks. There are no shots for that. And Fran just looks at her like, what on earth are you talking about? And earlier in the scene, she had said, your lips are moving, but I have no idea what you're talking about. And I just thought that would have been a great reaction to the lack of peacock allergy shots.
Well, and as I kind of realized as we were talking about this, in the previous scene, Cece had a peacock feather. So
Correct.
it was, again, that kind of symmetry or that connection in the episode.
Right.
Because peacocks, that just seems so random.
Well, so to me, that tells me they were at the Bronx Zoo, because the Bronx Zoo, at least the last time I was there, had peacocks roaming around. Pretty sure you're not supposed to pluck them. But anyway, I digress. So this brings us up a good question. So Sylvia points out that Gracie is running to Fran. And Fran makes a sweet comment about, now I know the love of a child. And Sylvia says, you could get fired from all that love, that the attachment isn't normal. And of course, Fran's reaction is, keep it up, Ma. The kid's dolls are in therapy. Do you think Gracie is too attached to Fran?
I think it's an understandable kind of attachment given her age. The fact that Fran is so warm and, loving with them, very domestic. And obviously at this point, I don't know how long, the mother, Sarah, has been deceased. Right. But it sounds like, prior to Fran, the kids went through nannies pretty quickly. Yes. Which, I would take, they didn't really form an attachment with them. And as we see, from the beginning, Maxwell's not the most present parent there is. Sure. So, to have someone come into your life who is very loving, there for you, like, I think it's understandable that Gracie is feeling the way she is.
Right. No, I agree. I agree. And I think Sylvia's comment is an overreaction. And again, to the symmetry of this episode, in the first scene, Cece makes a comment about the kids are getting too attached to Fran, and Maxwell says she is the nanny. That's kind of the point. And I think that's right, because she is their primary caretaker. Um,
Mhm.
so anyway, they've determined that Gracie's there, and she ran away and took a limo. So they have to, let Maxwell and Cece and everyone else know, right? Um,
Mhm.
and meanwhile, of course, Sylvia is taking the opportunity to spoil Gracie, and Fran tries to discourage her, and Sylvia makes the comment, "At the rate you're going, this could be my only grandchild."
Mhm.
Which, the older I get, the more I relate to that sort of sentiment. Um,
Mhm.
anyway, so Fran calls the Sheffield home to alert them that she has Gracie, and they have no idea she's missing.
Mhm.
Actually, I should take a step back. I don't know if this counts as, I guess it counts as a scene. Did you catch what Cece's greeting to Maxwell when he came home from the dentist?
Mhm. Darling, you're home.
Exactly, darling.
Mhm.
Oh my goodness.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
so you previously, I hate to keep saying to our listeners in our last conversation, but sorry guys,
Mhm.
we did already talk about this. You sort of raised the question of what is the relationship between Maxwell and Cece.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, because I feel like the show's been playing with ambiguity with them, where I mean, obviously we can tell that Cece is wanting a romantic relationship with
yes.
Maxwell. Um, Maxwell, of course, always refers to her as business partner, but I was questioning from Maxwell's point of view, does he see the relationship beyond just business partners? Um, because again, even though he was surprised that Cece wanted to spend time with it, he was very open to it. He doesn't make any comment when she says darling. So again, it's just kind of I was questioning, well, we know what Cece's wanting, but how does Maxwell see this kind of relationship? Is it just business partners or is it more like a friendship to him? What is it?
So for those of you who don't want even minor spoilers, you might want to skip ahead a little bit. But we learn in a later episode that Cece was a bridesmaid at Maxwell's wedding to Sarah.
Mm,
So they
interesting.
they are friends. We also learned that the business relationship aspect has been going on for a very long time. And you actually raised a question which I think would be good for our listeners. I keep wanting to say our readers, but I know your listeners. Um, about why is Cece always at the house? And the answer is because they work out of the Sheffield home. So the
Mhm.
office that we've seen before is the office. They don't have a separate, building they go to work at. That's where they do their work.
Which
And
is interesting to me. Like I would think he would have a separate office. Then where is he going in the morning, Debbie?
they must be going
Isn't
to
that,
a meeting or to the theater.
I guess.
I mean, I
I
was just
was just
gonna
like, wait a second. Where was he going then?
no, that's a great point. A great question. I will point out that throughout the series, we will see them bring like composers or actors or actresses. They will bring people to the house to audition or to talk about a, a, a show they're mounting or something.
Hmm.
So, I mean, I take your point that where are they going? Great question. But also, the other side of it is it's sort of convenient for him to work out of the house because Niles is there to answer the phone or the door. And think of how spiffy he is answering the door to bring, famous actor or actress back into the office for them, right? Niles can
Hmm.
also take care of refreshments. They have that nice big piano in the living room, which they use. Um, so yeah, that they work from the house. You'll actually there's a joke I'm thinking of in I think it's season 3 where Niles makes a comment about how Cece's been asking for her own office. Sorry, Miss Babcock has been asking for her own office or something like that. Uh,
Hmm.
P.S. It's not what you think. So stay tuned. In a few years, you'll get the reference. It'll be great.
We'll get there eventually.
Um,
Yeah.
so
But the other thing, kind of going off the darling the other thing I had noticed, and again, the theme of this whole episode is, the domesticity kind of thing. This was the first time I noticed a ring on Maxwell's right hand. And it kind
Yes.
of made me pause and think, have I seen that before? Or is it, just because of what I've been seeing in this particular episode that I'm more attuned to that kind of thing? But yeah, he has a ring on his right hand.
Right.
Um,
And it's interesting that you bring that up because I also noticed it in this episode. And I've seen this episode, as I said, so many times. I don't think I've ever noticed that detail or another detail I'll come back to. But that is not his wedding ring. And I know that because there's an episode, sorry guys, jumping into the future fun just a little bit. There's a future episode where Fran emphatically points to his left hand with his wedding ring on it because he's wearing his wedding ring at that point. I won't tell you why it's relevant or why it matters, but his wedding ring is on his left hand. Maybe it's
Interesting.
something that's inconsistent. I don't know. But to your point about how this episode's so domestically focused, and we're seeing these details. I noticed for the first time the pictures of the kids on the piano and in the living room
Mm-hmm.
that I can't say I've noticed before. I couldn't tell you if they're there later, but it does look like they're pictures from domestic bliss, if you will. Which is nice.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, Fran calls the Sheffield home, and Niles knows it's her because she has a very distinctive voice.
It's just a shot in the dark.
Exactly. And so she wants to talk to Maxwell, and Maxwell's, of course, talking about how, things went fine and the day was marvelous, and she has to talk to Gracie. And so Cece volunteers to go and get her, and Maxwell's just saying how it's good for the children to spend time with Cece because she's so calm and collected, and Cece races down frantic in a panic that she's gone.
Mm-hmm.
And how she's almost positive she came home with us.
Yeah.
Because you made a big deal about this last week and how Maxwell didn't call the girls by their pet names. It's interesting that he calls her Gracie on the phone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because basically what happens is that, Fran's being a little mischievous here. Because, she puts Gracie on the phone, and Maxwell's frantic,
Understandably.
and he and he goes, Grace, get off the phone. Wait, Gracie, you're there? So
Right.
again, this is the first time I've really noticed him calling her Gracie. And again, it's kind of in that relieved kind of, oh, there you are. I have not lost my daughter.
Right. And so he says, oh, we're leaving now. And Fran says, so are we. You'll have to meet us there. Park in the car wash, ask for the Michigan affair. And so we jump to the wedding reception.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the first time that Sylvia is going to meet Cece. And she does the same. She plays with that ambiguity that you were talking about before, where she says, who's the park ranger? And Fran says, that's his business associate. Uh-huh. Says Sylvia, and Fran's like, she wishes. Which actually, as you were talking about the ambiguity, in the first episode, you might not remember this. In the first episode, after Fran finds out that that Mr. Sheffield and Miss Babcock are throwing the backers party, well, actually, she learns that Cece's coming, and she says, what's a Cece? And Maggie says, father's lady friend.
Mm-hmm.
So that's more of that ambiguity that you were talking about. Anyway, I digress. So Maxwell wants to collect Gracie and get the heck out of there. And Gracie says, I don't want to go home. After they cut the cake, we're having schnapps. And she says it in this with this pure joy and this adorable grin. And it's just so funny to me because she probably has no idea what schnapps is. I'm not even sure I know.
Well, It's alcoholic, so probably not great for a little 8-year-old.
6-year-old. She's 6.
6. She's 6.
She's 6.
I did not realize she was 6. I was thinking 8.
Yeah, no, she's
Wow.
6.
Very precocious.
So and the reason we know she's 6 is because in this scene, as we find out from Cece and Gracie what happened, Fran makes a comment. Cece says they were all ganging up on me, and Fran says, "So you take it out on a 6-year-old?"
Well, because I thought maybe I thought there was a reference to the tap dancing boy.
Oh, interesting. I didn't think I thought it was
because they yelled at the
Robbie.
6-year-old. Yeah, Robbie. So I thought that was in reference to him, but I watched this once, so you may be correct.
I feel pretty confident because Cece was describing, after they gotten back from the zoo, she's describing the acrimony that was going on with the Sheffield children, and that they were ganging up on me. So, go ahead.
Yeah. And again, really quickly backing up to the beginning of the scene, we see at the very beginning of the scene, when we first get to the reception, they're doing, Fran and Gracie are doing kind of one of those classic wedding line dance, like conga line type of dancing. And then Fran sends Gracie off and says, "And don't mention global warming."
Correct.
So again, bringing that back in. That's a running thing throughout this episode. But I think it's hilarious that Cece does show up at that reception in her full safari getup.
Yes. And she does not look happy to be there at all.
But yeah, do you want to say what Fran calls Cece? What adjectives? When she finds out what the root of the problem is with Gracie?
Oh, so Gracie, so how this develops is Maxwell says, "We'll talk about when we get home," and Gracie says the line about the schnapps, and Maxwell says, "Well, it's Miss Fine's day off. We don't want to intrude." And Gracie, brokenhearted, says, "So it's true." "What's true, Angel?" says Fran. "You only spend time with me because Daddy pays you." And Fran, taken aback, and says, "What sort of idiotic, moronic imbecile would say a thing like that?" Or something like that.
It's vicious, cold-hearted imbecile.
Oh, sorry. Wow. I apologize. I'm misremembering. Yeah, you are clearly right. And of course, right before this, Cece almost smothers Gracie. Because
yes, and a bit of comedic physical acting.
Yes. And of course, as we noted in the breakfast scene on Saturday morning, Gracie runs to Fran for comfort. And here again, and Fran takes on the mothering role. And again, Fran takes on the mothering role after, Cece has to put Gracie down, and Fran takes a step forward and pulls Gracie towards her and pulls back to protect her from Cece. She won't be happy till she's finished her off, I think is what Fran says. And so anyway, so Gracie's upset that she finds out that Fran is paid to take care of her. And as the adults are talking about it, Gracie sneaks off, and all of a sudden they're like, "Well, where's Grace?" And Cece's like, "See, she's gone, and you jumped down my throat," or something like that. And so they were looking for her. And of course, Sylvia walks out of the ladies' room and says, "Looking for something?" "Yeah." "Well, if she's 3'2" and not a Jew, she's in there crying her little eyes out. And so Maxwell goes to try to comfort his daughter, and it doesn't go well since he tried to walk into the ladies' room. And so Fran goes, and I think it's good that Fran is the one who has the conversation with Gracie, because this is just such an iconic and heartwarming scene. After, of course, the woman who screamed comes out and hits Maxwell with her purse for being a creep.
Yep.
So Fran goes into the bathroom, and we don't see Gracie at first. She's locked herself in a stall. And Fran uses the specter of claustrophobia to get Grace out.
Yep.
And so she comes out, and this is the one thing in this episode that didn't sit well with me when I rewatched it in anticipation of our conversation. Fran picks Gracie up and says, after one day with my mother, you're ready for Jenny Craig.
Mm-hmm.
And so right now I'm reading this book called Burnout, something like Breaking the Stress Cycle or something like that. And it makes the point that by the age of 6, almost half of girls are worried about being too fat. By age 11, it's up to 2/3, and that increases to 92% of girls in adolescence. And most of them by that point start engaging in some form of weight control. And so that was the one thing that didn't sit great with me, recently. But anyway, I won't belabor the point. Then there's this great discussion between Fran and Gracie where Fran says, yes, it's true that I get paid to take care of you, but I don't get paid extra for loving you, and I do. And Gracie says, I love you too. And I love that scene. And then of course Fran's talking about how, she's not Ivana Trump anymore, and neither is she. But so I have to work for a living. And she has 75 cents, dollars, whatever in a lazy account or whatever. And how so she has to work for a living, and after they take out federal and state and FICA, it's a labor of love.
Yeah. And how lucky is she that she gets to do something that she enjoys,
Correct.
She says, lucky for me.
She has the best job in the whole world or something like that. Right. I love that scene. And so then of course, Gracie feels better, and Fran grabs the mirror that's sitting in front of them. Why there's a hand mirror at a public restroom, I don't know. And they look at themselves, and Gracie says, oh no, what is Jeffrey Michigan going to think? And Fran says, he'll think you're gorgeous. Now you look like his mother.
I'm a mess.
Yeah, because she's all puffy from crying. So they leave the bathroom, and Gracie says this very grown-up comment of through pain comes growth. And
that's in response to Maxwell asking how she is.
Correct.
And she's just like, with pain comes growth.
Exactly. And Maxwell at first doesn't realize what she means, and Fran's like, she's fine. Go dance with your daughter. And they go and dance, and they have this cute little father-daughter dance, and she's dancing on his feet. She's standing on his feet. And Fran says to Sylvia, isn't that the cutest thing you've ever seen? And Sylvia says, adorable. Go cut in. Like, from the very beginning of the series, we see Sylvia trying to push Fran and Maxwell together, and it's great.
And backing up a little bit, Fran's kind of staring down Cece or whatever. Cece to the little, basically one of the relatives is a young tap dancer. It's the grandson of Uncle Myron. And he's been trying to show off, and Cece's like, beat it, you untalented little troll. And then Fran's like talking to Cece and is like, I know you're incredibly threatened by me.
Hold on. Even just before you get into that, because that's also a great scene, a great discussion, dialogue, whatever you want to call it. Right before Cece tells little Robbie to beat it because he's an untalented little troll, Cece makes the comment about how she tries to be warm and loving.
Oh yeah.
And then it's like she turns on a dime, and she shows her true colors, which is one of those things that the show does over and over and over again. It says something, and then there's an immediate reaction, which is either to making it comedic or the exact opposite of what was just said.
Yep.
So, anyway, tell us about the conversation between Cece and Fran.
That basically, again, Fran's like, I know, you're incredibly threatened by me. You're a lovely woman, and I wish you well. But if you ever hurt her again, they're going to be trying to scrape this. I'm paraphrasing, her blue blood off the walls.
If you ever hurt one of my kids again, they'll be wiping your blue blood off the walls. And I mean that in the
Mhm.
nicest possible way. That was the exact
Yeah, so
line.
it's like it's full mama bear at this point.
Oh, yeah.
But also we see Sylvia trying to take one of the centerpieces, and she's like, "Well, if I paid $50 because she gave them a $50 check, she deserves something." And Fran's like, "They haven't even like cut the cake, right?"
Right.
so, so that kind of for me goes back to the first scene where we see Niles kind of messing with an arrangement, a flower arrangement.
Right. I
In the
never
corner.
put it together that way until you pointed that out. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I just want to go back to the conversation between Cece and Fran for a moment. You know,
Uh-huh.
because obviously we haven't talked about the very iconic pink dress yet, but as you said, Fran says, "I know you're incredibly threatened by me. Yes, even in this dress."
Yeah.
And in this conversation, there are a number of digs that Fran makes at Cece. You know, after she makes a comment also about how there's no reason we can't all live under one roof. Oh, that's right. You don't live with us.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
so I really enjoy that dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
So the main episode ends with, Sylvia kind of telling Fran to go cut in from where Gracie and Maxwell are dancing. But in a little, during the credits, we see that Cece sitting down, Fran's next to her, and they have Robbie uh, doing the put on a happy face little uh, choreography.
yep.
And Fran keeps having him do it again and again and again
And
for Cece.
it's clear that Cece is being punished,
Mm-hmm.
and she deserves
Yep.
it.
Yep. Was
So
there anything else in our scene by scene thing you wanted to discuss before we went into the shticks?
I don't think so. I was going to say, why don't we pick up with our favorite fashion first, since we've been kind of dancing around the pink bridesmaid
Mm-hmm.
dress.
Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of favorite, there's not a lot of options in this episode for good fashion.
Fair.
Um, I do like Gracie's coat that she comes in, her gray and black jacket that she comes to Fran's house in. But for the most part, we see Fran in either robes or this very violently pink dress, shiny dress, that has large yellow flowers. And she also has like a pink veil, short veil
Yes.
that she's wearing.
Yes.
And then again, of course, Cece, you had mentioned earlier, she shows up in this huge green jacket that's so wide in the shoulders.
Yes.
Um, and I was just thinking too, green is an interesting choice for that, just because of how jealous she is throughout this episode.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
yeah. But again, then the other big Cece outfit that we see is the whole safari getup. I mean, it's classic safari with the helmet, the hard helmet, and again later that peacock, and it's shorts, right? Like khaki shorts or like
Hmm.
the longer kind of thing. So like that I think is the first time maybe I've seen her and anything like that, because as you mentioned, she typically dresses in the more stereotypical 80s, 90s working woman type of look.
Right.
And then even Sylvia's outfit is quite something to behold. There's blue feathers
Yep.
at the top and the bottom, and then the most of the dress is a shining gold black. Um, and then she has her stockings that she was putting nail polish on, but not clear nail polish on, and her frozen shoes.
Which by
So
this point would have
again,
thawed. By this point, they would have
mhm,
thawed out. So
yeah, so they're probably damp, which does not sound
no,
very comfortable
that
either.
sounds unpleasant. That plus the sweaty
Mhm.
feet. No, thank you.
Yeah, not good. Maybe that's why she's just gonna wear it once, because
Maybe
who's gonna want to wear those another time? But yeah, so there's not a lot of like
there's not a lot of good
great
fashion.
fashion. It's memorable fashion.
Yes.
What are your thoughts, Debbie?
So I just want to add one thing about the very violently pink bridesmaid dress that I think we should just note its width, because
Mhm.
it's not like a form-fitting dress in any way. It's like, think of a, if we're thinking of bridal gowns, it's a ball gown, right? It's round
Mhm.
and it's sort of tiered, and as you pointed out, it has these flowers down the front, like not even like all over the place, but they're just on the front, it seems. And there's the weird matching veil.
Mhm.
On the bright side, the one thing I will say that I really loved about the wedding reception scene is not only do you see the bride in the background, but you also see some of the other bridesmaids also wearing this very interesting dress.
Mhm.
Makes me kind of wonder if they could get a picture of the whole bridal party, because those skirts would not fit in one picture.
Yeah, that would be kind of difficult.
Um, yeah, we've already talked about Cece's safari getup. One thing I will mention is it looks like Maggie is starting to show a little bit more personality in her clothing choices. Because I think she has a coat that has some color on it. When they get back from the zoo. Um, but kind of as you said, there really isn't a lot of great fashion in this episode. Although I guess you know probably because I've seen it so many times, like the violently pink bridesmaid dress doesn't disturb me as much as it disturbed you. I guess I'm just used to it by this point. Not what I would dress my bridesmaids in.
Mhm.
But yeah, there's really not too much to comment on otherwise.
Mhm.
Um, do we want to? We've already kind of hinted at some of our Yiddish for our Yiddish cup. So schmutz, that is the
Mhm.
first word. It's dirt, grime, debris. It's something that you don't want. You want to get rid of. We've also kind of already talked about how you look like a ham being a weird reference.
Mhm.
You also mentioned that how many dentists work on Saturday. I'd point out that if Uncle Myron were an observant Jew, he would not be working on Shabbat. So,
Mhm.
and then the only other word I caught that I thought people might not know, at the very beginning of the scene at the wedding reception, everyone shouts "L'chaim," which is a toast, which means to life. It's also featured very prominently in a song from Fiddler on the Roof, for people who
Huh.
are looking for more
Mhm.
things to pick up on Jewish traditions and things. I would recommend that. Do you want to talk a little bit about our 90s nostalgia or our notable New Yorkers next?
Let's do notable New Yorkers,
All right.
actually.
Who'd you
So that,
catch?
of course, also incorporates not necessarily New Yorkers, but references. So Donna Reed, I had to look that up. Did you know who Donna Reed
I did.
was?
I did.
Oh,
And the
okay.
only reason I knew was because of there's an episode of Gilmore Girls um, in one of the early seasons where Rory dresses up like Donna Reed and makes her boyfriend dinner. And she starts talking about the research she did into Donna Reed.
Oh,
So,
okay. Yeah. So for those who may not know, Donna Reed was an actress. She was the actress in It's a Wonderful Life, but was also part of like a pretty long running sitcom kind of show where she was the housewife kind of thing, right?
the
Um,
Donna Reed show.
yeah. And uh, basically, this Fran references her with the pies to cool on the windowsill. So again, the whole domesticity type of thing. Um, I've already kind of mentioned.
Oh, hold on.
Um,
Before
oh,
you go
yeah.
too much further, when with the pies cooling thing, Fran
Mhm.
then hums a song as she kind of skips out. That is part of the theme song to the Donna Reed show.
Oh, okay.
So I just wanted to
Um,
add that. Go ahead, continue.
yeah. And then I already mentioned the Miss Babcock, I presume, is a reference to Dr. Livingston, I presume, which Henry Stanley said. And then let's see here. I feel like there weren't quite as many as before. There's the scooter pie that we discussed. But one of the things I noticed were in terms of actors. Now, Little Robbie, did you recognize the actor?
No.
Um, okay. So he is a child actor. His name is, I had to look it up. but I recognize him. His name's Blake McIver Ewing. He played Waldo Aloysius Johnston III in the 1994 version of The Little Rascals, and he also played Derek S. Boyd in Full House. So like
Oh,
I saw him like everywhere in the early 90s in terms of different media. So when he was doing his tap dancing and stuff, I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's him. So I did look up on Wikipedia to see if he was in an episode of Nanny, and he was. So that's just like some listeners may be, know who he is. Did you ever watch like The Little Rascals?
probably. I couldn't affirmatively say, I couldn't definitively say yes or no. I'm pretty sure
Okay.
the answer is yes.
I watched it so many times as a kid. So yeah, I definitely recognized him right away. So were there any other references that you picked up on,
Well,
Debbie?
I already mentioned Ivana Trump.
Mm-hmm.
Not sure Oscar Mayer counts, but we also caught that. I caught 3 others, 2.5 others,
Ooh,
depending on how you count.
okay.
As you pointed out in that first scene, Fran is shouting to get, the kids down. Then Mr. Sheffield, Miss Babcock's waiting, or something, or here, something like that. And Cece's response is, "They already freed Willie," and that is a
Mm,
reference to Free Willy, a 1993 movie.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
The other reference also in that first scene, after Fran has gotten the kids ready for school, she helps Maxwell with his tie, and he says he's going for a double Windsor. Churchill wore one. That's clearly a
Oh yeah.
reference to Winston Churchill. And if you
Yes.
don't know who Winston Churchill is, I recommend doing some quick Googling, because I'm not going to help you on that front. The last reference is not really a reference, but obviously after Cece and the kids come home from the zoo, Niles is teasing her, and he says, "Next week, Chuck E. Cheese." And so I'm including
Mm-hmm.
Chuck E. Cheese, the mouse, as
Okay.
as another person. So that's why I said it's like 2.5.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and
So
then
90s nostalgia. Or sorry, go ahead.
that's exactly where I was going. How'd you know?
Psychic.
So global warming. So
Yeah.
you pointed out that at the wedding reception, Fran says, "Don't mention global warming." Not only that global warming was a thing, but that was actually the appropriate term in the 90s. It is, since we no longer use the term global warming, it is climate change.
Mm-hmm. Yes. But still is depressing.
Still a problem. Yeah. The polar ice caps are still melting, and it is bad.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So Gracie would be stressed.
Yes.
Even today.
Did you catch anything else?
So, I mean, in general, the fashion that we have already discussed was very 90s. And even to like the type of makeup that Sylvia had on, because she had like blue eyeshadow. Did you catch that?
No.
And then like, she's really going for her lips. Do you remember that scene? She's just putting her lipstick on.
Right.
Again, I feel like some of the ways of talking about things, again, just the like the Jenny Craig comment that you mentioned, which I guess too could be a reference to Jenny Craig.
Fair.
And talking about how it's a female thing, that kind of stuff. I feel like in 2021 probably would be a bit different in terms of those conversations.
Fair.
But yeah, I'm trying to think, was there anything that really stuck out to you, Debbie?
So I keep saying, every time we see this, I say I'm not going to point it out every time, but the very old cars, every time I can't help myself. And then something you pointed out in previous episodes is that we've seen these house phones, and we've previously seen a cordless phone, but the Fines have a corded phone, like a phone with a cord, which also feels very dated.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if this counts as dated or not, because I don't know if technology has changed drastically in the last 20 years or so. But after Sylvia tells Fran to go comb her father's hair, she puts the glue on, and the glue is with a dropper. She uses a dropper to drop the glue on, and the comment is, take that into your father before the glue dries. Guess what? The glue dries and it's stuck on her hand. That just seemed sort of dated to me.
You know what I just thought of, Debbie?
What?
Is that nowadays, in terms of Gracie running away, first of all, depending on her situation, she potentially could have a cell phone, because different parents give kids phones at different times. And so I'd be curious if they would have an app, like, because there's certain apps you can put on kids' phones to keep track of them. I don't know if Maxwell would think that far ahead, but it is, like, interesting if they could have tracked her down some way. Or she probably would have called like an Uber. I don't know.
I thought that's where you were going, that she would call an Uber. Or I guess order an Uber. She wouldn't even call them. But no, I think you're right that if she had a cell phone, there probably would have been an app to track her. And so they wouldn't have panicked as quickly. They would have just been like, oh, she's in Flushing. Well, that's weird. But yeah, those were the things that caught my attention. I didn't think there was anything else super dated, for lack of better phrasing. So then the only two things left for us to talk about are our future fun and our episode rating. So I've already covered the fact that in a future episode, we will see the children fighting over who has to take the town car versus the limo. Spoiler alert, there are later episodes where Maxwell does do the unthinkable. He drives the car himself, and it's not a
what?
So we learn that he has a sports car. He actually buys a sports car at one point, and then there's a different episode where they're driving a sports car. I couldn't tell you if it's the same one or not. So we'll see. Time will tell. One thing you noted, you've seen is that it's not just Sylvia's apartment. It's Sylvia and Morty's apartment. Morty is Fran's father. Right after Maxwell greets Sylvia, she says, "Hold on, I want you to meet my husband," and shouts, "Morty!" But we don't see or hear. We don't hear him. We don't talk to him. We don't talk to Morty, so we don't hear his voice until season 6. We see parts of him in advance of that. We see him drop his toupee. We see him drop a fork. We see like his hands, basically, or his toupee, but we don't really see him. I am pretty sure the bathroom that Gracie was hiding in the stall in, we see out in a later episode. And we will see more of Gracie interacting with Fran as if she were her mom. And I will just say, because I wrote myself a little note, that the olive green coat that Cece is wearing will make a reappearance, at least in the episode called The Nanny Napper. And I wonder if we would still call her green with jealousy then. So yeah, I guess we're up to our episode rating. I think it's my turn to go first.
Yes, it's your turn, but I'm not going to be surprised by
No one is going to be surprised when I say I am giving this episode 5 out of 5 lipsticks. Because this is my favorite episode in this season. As I have said, love so much about it, almost everything about it. And yeah. How about you?
I'm giving it a 4.5. Just because there were a couple of little comments that did kind of take away a little bit of the enjoyment for me. Not to dwell too much on it, but I still it was an enjoyable episode. And again, it was very heartwarming. I can definitely see why it's your favorite.
Yeah, it's just such a good episode. I'm just such a fan. Even if the fashion.
And this is probably our longest episode. to?
Probably. So thank you guys for bearing with us. We'll do the outro real fast so you can get back to your day-to-day lives. That's all
Mhm.
we have for you today. We hope you had a fine time with us as we revisited The Nanny. Join us next week when we'll be discussing episode 6, The Butler, the Husband, the Wife, and Her Mother.
If you would like to reach us on social media, you can find us on Twitter at Nanny Revisited. You can also send us email at afinetimenannyrevisited@gmail.com. Have a great week.